Senator Huff. For what purpose, sir?
Madam President, I'd like to introduce our speaker.
Without objection. Senators, we have a speaker, Senator Huff, to present.
Thank you, Madam President. Members, I'm pleased to welcome Bill Watkins to our chamber. Bill Watkins joined California Lutheran University in June 2009 as the Executive Director of the new Center for Economic Research and Forecasting and as an Associate Professor of Economics. He's also helped to launch CLU's new Master of Science in Economics program, which focuses on forecasting and applied research. Prior to coming to CLU, Watkins had served as the Executive Director of the University of California, Santa Barbara Economic Forecast Project. In his 9-year tenure, he expanded the project's publications and geographic scope and enhanced its reputation. Previously, he served as an economist for the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System in Washington, D.C. Watkins has been widely published in academic journals, traditional media, and new media, and is quoted regularly by news organizations throughout the world. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration finance from California State University Northridge and a master's and doctorate in economics from UCSB. Please help me welcome Dr. Bill Watkins.
Senators, thank you. On October 31st, 2011, the people who keep track of the world's population announced that the population of the world had gone over 7 billion people. And for several days after that, we were sort of inundated by predictions of demographic doom because of a population that would grow without bounds and would starve the earth of its resources. The problem with that was it was wrong. Demographers had known for decades that our problem, in fact, was going to be the exact opposite, and that within decades of now, the world's population will be declining. Already we're seeing declines in Russia, Japan, Germany, and other countries. Eventually, it will become a worldwide phenomenon because it turns out that once you educate women, they start having fewer babies. It doesn't matter what race, religion, culture they come from. You give them an education, take them out of the kitchen, and fewer babies. So one of the things as I prepared for this was thinking about, okay, what's that mean for California? What's California's future? And in your packets, you have a few charts, very few charts. For an economist, this is the absolute minimum, so bear with me. Your first one looks like this. And this is the right side up, the domestic migration in California. These are DOF numbers. The Census Bureau says that domestic migration in California, that is migration from other states to California or from California to other states, has been negative for 20 years. Consecutive years, but it's been highly negative. And I have to tell you, this is such a change. Last week, I think it was Friday, I had the privilege of watching Assemblywoman Shirley Weber give a talk on her family. She talked about her family's experience, how her father, with a 6th grade education, was a sharecropper in Hope, Arkansas, and who moved to California and went to work for a steel mill and raised a family, several children. I think there were 7 or 8. Shirley herself, Assemblywoman, it was phenomenal. She obtained an education, had a Ph.D. from UCLA by the time she was 26. And she was lamenting the fact that that's not possible anymore, that great migration. There's lots of stories like that. Almost all of us have a story like that in our past where our family came from someplace else. They came to California because it was the Golden State. It was a place where opportunity existed. And it was sort of boundless opportunity. Since then, though, something has changed. Our population, people are leaving. Over those time years, from these data, just under 3 million, 2,987,000 people have left California. That's more than the combined populations of San Diego, San Francisco, and San Jose. That's a lot of people. And it's such a change from what's happened before. So as we move on to the data, we look at total immigration, and that's your next chart. And what you see there is that there was this burst of negative total migration in California in the 90s as California paid for the peace dividend as the East Bloc countries collapsed. After that, we resumed our normal case of positive migration. However, for the past 8 consecutive years, total migration, even including international migration, has been negative. And in fact, in each of the past 2 years, international migration to California has been less than 100,000 people. This is a huge change over what's happened in the past. And as we look behind those numbers some more, we see that where California used to get almost half of the illegal immigrants into the United States, we now only get about 25%. They're choosing to go someplace else. It's also the case that in the past we sort of distinguished between what we called pull immigration from push immigration. The idea is that pull immigration would attract people from around the United States for the opportunity that was so abundant here in California. And that push was sort of the situation that in some countries the situation is so bad that if you can get to California, even in a recession, that's a good move. So that's the push. But what we're seeing is even now, as Mexico in particular, with the 5% unemployment rate, with an economy that's growing quite well compared to our own, that push is going away. And, well, we'll get to immigration a little bit more. The next chart I have for you is birth rates. And as you see, birth rates are declining. California, though, is quite lucky in that we have a birth rate quite a bit higher than the United States. The United States as a whole is about 12 births per thousand. Ours is significantly higher than that. That's generally attributed to a young Hispanic population, but that rate will decline. It will decline toward the U.S. average. So the birth rates are declining. And then California's, I don't have a chart for death rates, seems a little unnecessary, but death rates in California are also low. And in trying to interpret that, because the population is certainly aging and it's low relative to the rest of the country, I think part of what we're seeing is that the deaths are actually counted in the immigration numbers. So if you think about the process of aging, as you become older and older and less able to communicate with the world shrinks. And it eventually becomes a relatively small group as you're inward looking with just your family and all. And at that point, it doesn't make much sense to pay for the amenities that California has when the cost of living is so high. So I think that's one reason the death rate is so low here. The next to last chart I have is the population growth rate. And what you see there is it's fallen below 1%. And it's almost surely going to go negative within 2 or 3 decades. And that's going to present a whole bunch of issues. Now, one question is declining population good? For me personally, that'll mean less competition for Sierra trails. That's great. It also means less money to pay for trail maintenance, less people to do it. So there's definitely trade-offs there. An environmental case, when you look at it that way, less demand on resources, less carbon emissions, all that. So that's good. The problem is, though, as you go from a growing population to a shrinking population, unless there's a huge increase in productivity, there's one generation at least that's going to have a lower standard of living than their parents, something that never happened in the United States. And that is an important event, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. Also, it's going to present some benefits that you're not going to need miles of new freeway to cope with a expanding population, but at the same time, you're going to have fewer people working to pay for our debts that we have now, and both on the books and that are committed to people. So it's definitely a mixed situation. It's a situation that we've never faced before, and a situation that I suggest we try to delay if we can, and I'll have some suggestions on that, and also that we start thinking about how to deal with it now. The population's just not going to just take X% of people from every age group. The composition of of the population is going to change. And give you a hint of what that might mean, from 2000 to 2010, California's population increased by 3.4 million people. But our population of people 15 and younger declined by 150,000. And our population between 30 and 45 declined by over 400,000. And there's been a debate in California whether tax rates will chase rich people off. That's not what's happening. What we're seeing is people with family, people 30 to 45 years old, people with children. Those are the people that are leaving. And they're not leaving because of the tax rates. They're leaving because of lack of opportunity. They're going someplace where they can have a career, have a family, the American dream of a yard and a couple of dogs and all that. That's the people who are leaving, that middle. And I think that leaves sort of an empty spot there. It's going to be a challenge for our communities because those are the people who build communities. Retirees that made their money anywhere and come to California, they're not here to invest. They're here to consume. That's what retirees do. They're not anxious to increase their tax rates for schools or things like that. It's the people. We're sort of losing the economic heart of our state as these young people, young families are leaving. That's a big concern for me. The last chart I have is an example of a bimodal distribution because I see the state bimodal. One center of mass, another center of mass. And increasingly, this state is becoming so divided. In fact, people say, to the point where I no longer think California overall statistics mean much at all. Because what's happening in San Jose is not at all what's happening in Fresno. And they're not even very much the same place. So in general, if we like to simplify, you think of coastal California, basically from the ocean to the first hills, mountains, and then everybody else, everywhere else. And the differences between those economies. And I tell people all the time, most of my work is in relatively affluent communities in coastal California. They don't know what's out there. And I tell them to go to the Central Valley, get off the freeway, get off 99, go to some of those cities, go to Arvin, Weed Patch. There's lots of places you can go to. Guadalupe and Santa Barbara counties, completely different than the south coast of Santa Barbara. And see what exists there, because you'll see poverty of a nature that you wouldn't believe was even in America, much less California. And that's something that I think we need to deal with, and we need to recognize this is not one state. We have several areas, several populations. As we divvy up the population, there's also a gap between young and old. If that group 30 to 45 is leaving, so you sort of think about our graduates from our universities. They stay, they enjoy the amenities. California has abundant amenities. But then when it comes time to have those kids buy that house, start that career in earnest, they pack up and leave. So old and young, and rich and poor. And the leading examples of this in California, Monterey, south coast of Santa Barbara, we have these communities where there is essentially no middle class. In Santa Barbara County, where I worked for almost 10 years, quite familiar with it, something in excess of 20,000 people drive into the south coast from every day, maybe 15 to somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 from Ventura County, and another 5 or so thousand from North County or San Luis Obispo. And in fact, when we had mudslides a few years, it was 5 or 6 years ago, the freeway between Ventura and Santa Barbara was blocked, and businesses reported about 25% of their workforce didn't get there. But the problem is that commuting only works for a certain income group. If we think about Santa Barbara, if you make enough money, you'll live in Santa Barbara because you can afford housing. But if you don't make enough money, the commute is fairly expensive, especially with gas prices today. That's not an option. Some places we see employers commuting for people. I have watched over the years an outfit called Plowboy Landscape, and they used to have trucks with 2 people in it. Now they use vans driving every day from Ventura to Santa Barbara. But more often what happens is people crowd into single-family residences, and you see several families living in a residence designed for one. And that creates all the same demands on government services as if you had built it for demand for one, except you didn't build it for that many people. And so you have not enough parking, high utility demand, things like that. So we're looking at, I think, sort of an old and rich, young and poor divide, in addition to the geographic divide. And Dan Walters recently was discussing in one of his pieces in the Sacramento Bee the governor's proposal to move money from rich school districts to poor school districts. And Dan described this as perhaps the first skirmish in what will probably be a continuing class conflict as the wealthy, richer people and the younger, poorer people compete for government resources. Okay. Demographics don't happen by themselves. Other things go on at the same time. And one of the things that's going on right now is dramatic changes in technology. And I'd like to speak a few minutes on that. First, talk about venture capital. The Bay Area, particularly San Francisco, San Mateo County, are the envy of the universe in terms of the energy and the entrepreneurial and the job creation that goes on there. It is an amazing thing. California is the destination for 40% of the world's venture capital. And there are apparently what we call increasing returns to scale. In that to do a venture capital business, especially the traditional venture capital business, you think about what it takes to come up with something like the computer. You need to know how to manufacture it. You need financial expertise. You need manufacturing expertise, logistic expertise, all kinds of expertise. And what's happened is that by itself, that infrastructure to support venture capital has assembled itself in San Jose and in San Mateo County. And these venture capitalists need to be very close to their investment. I talked to one who was opening shop in Santa Barbara, and he was talking about, Santa Barbara has a bit of an internet retailing software center developing. Of course, the University of California is throwing off all sorts of things all the time. Fantastic resource for it. So the venture capital set off a satellite office in Santa Barbara. And I said, well, are you also going to look for innovations coming out of Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo? And he said, no. Cal Poly's too far away. He wanted to be 15 minutes from his investment. He wanted to be able to go there today to help solve problems. So if you were a young person or an old person, doesn't matter, in Ohio, in Greece, doesn't matter where you are, and you wanted the infrastructure to create a business, to create a new industry, you went to San Jose. That's where the money was. That's where the people are. And that's always been, in some sense, that's California's last great strength. Right now, only two counties that are significant in state's economic data, have more jobs than they had at the beginning of the recession. San Francisco and San Mateo, both at about 102%. Every other county in California is around 95, 97 at best. So it served us well. Problem is that technology is changing. All of you have cell phones or tablets. And now business is about writing apps for those. So I play guitar. I needed a drum machine. If I go to Guitar Center, a drum machine's $300 starting. I was able, dawned on me, maybe I can download one, put it on my tablet. I did, $2.99. I also said, while I was doing that, maybe I can get a metronome. That was free. Didn't even have any ads. And a tuner. That was free, no ads too. And the point is that instead of building a factory and all the demands that go into that, nowadays a venture capitalist is looking for a lot less money. They want to write an app. They want to distribute the app. That takes a lot less money, a lot less infrastructure to support, and it's a lot slower what we call a burn rate, how fast they soak up the money. And where the typical first stage investment a few years ago used to be measured in tens of millions, it's now measured in a couple of million. And that's a threat to our position threat to San Jose for sure, because that can be done almost any places. In fact, there's accelerator programs being developed around the country. I happen to see one in Bend, Oregon. It's an opportunity for other cities in California to sort of move some of that vigor that's in the San Jose area to their counties. So that's a changing technology that may impact us. I'm going to ask you to bear with me to your econ classes, please. You remember when we discussed gross product? We talked about if you mowed your own lawn and your neighbor mowed their own lawn, that didn't affect gross product. But if you paid your neighbor to mow your lawn and he paid you to mow his lawn, gross product would go up. So in some sense, measures of gross product are not very good at measuring really what we're trying to get at, which is what standard living is. And with the changing technology I just discussed, I think it's really understating the growth. For instance, if I'd have bought that drum machine, GDP would have gone up $300 at least. As it was, it went up $3. If I'd have bought a tuner, probably $25, $35, GDP would have done it. So in some sense, with today's changing technology, our GDP numbers are really not measuring as quality. They're probably understating it. It's also the case that I told you before, I worry about that time when the retiring generation overwhelms the younger generation, and I said we needed a big productivity increase, right? And technology may be here just in time. Our advances in robotics, artificial intelligence are huge, and we actually have a chance to have that big productivity increase we need at exactly the right time. That would be an amazing thing, but it's so often happened. Over the centuries, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, people have worried about technology putting people out of work, and so far it never has, right? But this could be a big huge boost to us and help us. But at the same time, if you have robots doing work, you need to change the tax structure because labor taxes aren't going to do it for you. That's something else is going to have to be done, probably a consumption tax. Because if you've got a large retirement community, a huge amount of capital building things, and places of business without very many people, the tax base on their current structure in California could be a real challenge. So speaking of that, the big loser in the Industrial Revolution was the horse. At the end of the 18th century, there were 11 people for every horse in Europe. And horses provided most of the energy for transportation, lots of manufacturing along with water power. Horses did a lot of stuff. Today in the United States, there are 111 people for every horse because the horse is basically a very expensive pet today. And the horse's demise is directly a result of the Industrial Revolution. The horse lost the Industrial Revolution. People gained, horses lost. As we move forward, the possibility of robotics and artificial intelligence, you wonder about our lowest skilled workers. Now, the combination of changing technology and increasing trade has meant that the wage gap between our least skilled workers and our higher skilled workers has become increasingly large, inequalities increasing, and all that. So, some of you are old enough to remember that cartoon, Lil Abner. It was an Al Cap cartoon. And they lived in a place called Dog Patch. And there was a critter called a shmoo. And the shmoo loved to help humans. It would become ecstatic at the idea of the shmoo becoming dinner. And they would split themselves up, they would do for everything. And the people in Dog Patch eventually had everything anybody could want, and they drove the shmoos out. They killed them all. And the reason they did is that people without jobs lose something that's basic to humanity. And we see this in populations across the world where all of their physical needs are taken care of, but they're not asked to work. They lose something. And as a result of losing that, we see drug abuse, alcohol abuse, serial relationships, temporary relationships, children out of wedlock, all sorts of social pathologies. And as technology increasingly displaces the lower cost worker, We step back and we think for a minute. If a technology is putting a worker out of work, it's because that technology is cheaper than the person. It doesn't mean the person all of a sudden has zero marginal productivity. It means that they're just more expensive. Now, we're not going to treat people the way we treat horses. So the problem becomes, how do we keep these people? How do we keep them working? And if we know, and we do know, we will not abandon them. As a society, we will support them one way or another. My recommendation, you're not going to get many recommendations from me today, but one, is that what we need to do to keep these people working is to get rid of the minimum wage and, in fact, put in something like the earned income tax credit, because that's got to be a lot cheaper than the social programs you're going to have to put in place to deal with all these people with all this time in their hands. So the idea is keep them working, doesn't matter what they're working at, because a job is the best social program we have. So now, if we face a declining population, and the world's population is declining, does California's population have to decline? It doesn't. I saw today, and I was pleased to see the universal support for legalizing and dealing with people here that are illegally. I have been proposing for several years a massive increase in immigration in the United States, and for a variety of reasons. One, immigrants are not random draws. I like to say it's not like you close your eyes, reach into Athens, and pull out a crazy Greek. We have the most productive, hardest working Greeks in the world. We have the most productive, hardest working Chinese, Mexican, I don't care where you came from. People who migrate are not a random draw. They are people with what my grandmother used to call gumption. People who are willing to take a risk, leave everything they know, go to another country, and start a new life. Okay. We need these people. We need these people in California. They start businesses at a higher rate. Just came out last week, The Economist, maybe it was over the weekend, Economist article, The Great American Jobs Machine, and it's all about immigrants. And in fact, just in California, 40% of our new high-tech companies are founded by immigrants. 40%. They're not 40% of the population. We need to increase it. We need to find a way to bring those people here. We need to create stories like Shirley Wepper's story, where families migrate to California because of the opportunity and the ability to raise a family. So how do you increase it? Part of it requires some legal changes for international, and that's a national problem, and you've made your recommendation for part of it already. But the other thing is you need to create an opportunity economy. I think he's left already, but I had the privilege of watching Senator Wright give a presentation in Los Angeles a few months ago. And he gave an energetic and passionate argument for his constituents. And he talked about how 30, 40, 50 years ago, California produced, and I can't remember the numbers, but a huge percentage of the world's tires. We produced a huge percentage of the world's airplanes. We produced cars. And we had an economy where a family without a college education could afford a house, have a career, raise families, and send their children to the University of California. And it's just not happening anymore. And he's lamenting the fact that it's not happening anymore. So there's international, there's domestic. If we can find a way to create an economy with opportunity, then California can continue to prosper. And it doesn't mean we have to have the same tax rate as Texas. California is a beautiful place to live. California's climate is excellent. There's all sorts of reasons to be here instead of Texas. And what we do need to make it so that companies can compete with companies in Texas. Now, our workers are more productive. About a decade ago, the San Francisco Fed did a study. California workers are about 2% more productive than workers across the nation, even after you adjust for education levels, capital levels, industry sectors, that sort of thing. They're more productive. They don't know why. I say, hey, this is the end of the line for immigration. People who came to the United States went west. California is where they are. We got the best the world has to offer. And I think that's a huge advantage. And I ask you that when you look at legislation, you look at how does it impact opportunity? How does it impact those families that are 30 to 45 years old with a breadwinner, with the children that are under 15, and how we can do that to restore California's vigor? Thank you very much. Hannah-Beth, good to see you. It's been a long time.
And thank you so much for being here today. I've had the privilege of hearing you speak many times, and as you were speaking, I kept saying, yeah, he's right. And then I realized that you're right, because that's what you've told me over the last several years. And I've sort of adopted it, and I appreciate hearing the fact that when we sort of knee-jerk that, oh, taxes are sending people out of California, that really isn't the answer. And if we want to make California vibrant, as it has been and continues to be, but perhaps more vibrant, we need to do something about that middle class you talked about, the 30 and 40-year-olds. And I was wondering, I happen to have one that's not quite 30 yet myself and is living back east. And when I say, come home, she says, I can't afford to. And the big #1 issue is housing. At least it seems to be. And these are young people who are professional, they're making a decent living, and they're getting lured by places, God forbid, like Austin, Texas, or Oklahoma City, or other places that are really investing resources in the future and luring these talented young people who are the leaders of the future, who are going to generate the businesses and provide the high-income type of position. So I'm wondering, could you share with us what your view would be if you were master of the universe? What would you call for us to repair California, or at least to put us back on track to be that vibrant, dynamic economy that we have been over the last several decades?
Okay, thank you. I, too, go to New York to visit my grandkids. And I think housing is a key issue. Housing is expensive here. We have what I call DIRT: delay, uncertainty, regulation, and taxes. And it's the combined cost of that that affects businesses, not just the tax rate. And taxes at the end, because to me, it's probably the least important of it. When a businessman, in fact, take this opportunity, I'm writing a book on this, so I'll send you a copy when it's done. Delay. Hugely expensive. Interest costs on this, uncertainty, and of course the longer something takes to develop, the more uncertain it is about the market at the time it comes on, that sort of thing. So and especially at local governments, delay and uncertainty is something that they can affect to a large part. Somebody was asking me the other day about building houses. I go, hey, you want to build a house, go to Fresno. You won't be able to sell it, but you can build one there pretty quick. You want to build a house in Santa Barbara, well, it'll take a few years, right? And and part of it is because the communities are choosing this. So one of the ways to think about California communities, as this process goes on, eventually the people who move there, because they like it exactly the way it is, they close the gates behind them, right? Everybody wants to. But eventually they have the mass to control the election, and they delay it. Now, I'm happy to see Santa Barbara had a major conference last Friday. That's where I saw Assemblywoman Weber up in North County talking about the energy options and all that. So at least they're discussing it. But you've got to cut down the delay, the uncertainty associated with projects, and I would argue that the regulation opportunities in California are quite large. Now, it's quite interesting to me that the nationality that creates jobs at the highest rate in California happens to be Greek. And my answer to that is that regulations in Greece are so bad that even California looks good. So.
I want to thank you so much for being here, too. This is a really fascinating discussion. I want to go back to what you said about work. I don't know the answer to this, but it does seem to me that even with the population dropping, technology is displacing people at such an enormous rate that we may reach a point where the issue is the distribution of work. What do you do so an adult gets out of bed in the morning and does something other than sit in front of a TV? And then how do you distribute income? The things that I can think of that can't be robotized are sort of things like teaching, although we're even talking about distance learning now. but many of those things would imply more public sector money. And so how do you project that into the future?
I think that's a real risk. And it's not just the technology. Trade has had a large part to do with it. The lowest cost non-skilled factory workers, not even in China anymore. China's complaining about competition from Vietnam. And so that's affecting among the low-skilled workers that we have out there. Again, I think the only thing we can do is recognize, one, we're going to support these people one way or another. And two, a job is the best social program that's out there. So let them work at any wage that can be negotiated and pay them the difference to a standard of living that we're willing to have our neighbors live with. That's my suggestion. Yeah. Sir.
Dr. Watkins, I want to thank you very much for giving us a perspective, at least for me. Recently, I was in my district, Central Orange County,
Where?
Santa Ana Unified. Central Orange County, Santa Ana Unified. And I asked the superintendent to give me some figures because one of the local high schools had been designed for 3,000 kids. A few years, it was at 3,300, down to 28 now. And I asked, where are all these kids going? Primarily Latino population, so I figured Mexico. They said some. I said primarily Texas and the Carolinas, which shocked me. And at the same time, it made me think. Now, today, you gave me kind of the perspective of what's going on with those 30 to 35, 30 to 40 families that can't find the job, and I think that's the key. Can't find a job, so you move out. I had a friend of mine that I've seen, just constituents I've made friends with the last 5 years. He just called me and said, I need you as a recommendation. I'm moving to South Carolina. I can't find the job. Mm-hmm. The bigger picture, though, is as we see what appears to be a trend in declining populations, a decline in economic growth, have you seen our actuarials adjust for this in the state of California? Because we have issues with our expected rate of return at CalPERS and CalSTRS, the type of public debt we're issuing now, and essentially the overall economic growth and how that essentially filters down into repayment of these debts in the future, in the next 30 years.
Right. Oh, two things. One thing you touched on with school closings. In a declining population, that's something that has to happen, but that tears communities apart. Communities, when a school closes, there's a war and drives neighbor against neighbor. So that's one effect. The other issue is exactly the debt, the pensions, and all those things that have accumulated with a smaller workforce. That's going to be a problem. And that's another reason, if it's inevitable, I don't believe it's inevitable, but if it is, to delay that decline in population. But I think California is a wonderful place, and there is a lot of poverty around the world and people with the opportunity to come here, if we can backfill that all and more with immigration. It's all about opportunity. And as Senator Jackson said, housing. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watkins, for sharing some of your knowledge on this issue with regards to the economy in California. A couple points. One thing that you highlighted, Senator Rod Wright, our colleague, spoke to, I think a few months ago in Los Angeles with regards to back in the day, pre-globalized economy, when you can be a Californian, you didn't have to attend University of California at Los Angeles or Cal Lutheran or, for that matter, San Jose State University. A good high school diploma, a good paying job, mostly a union job with an aerospace industry or elsewhere could give you enough to provide for your family, education, pay for a mortgage, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, that has changed quite dramatically. And with the globalization, the economy, one of our colleagues, Senator Alex Padilla, has focused a lot on advanced manufacturing, how much of a manufacturing has left California to other right-to-work states and outside of the country, and we're getting some of that back, but we're getting it back now in terms of advanced manufacturing as opposed to replacing it with more folks. You talked about delays and regulations, and I know that is an issue that we have discussed about incessantly on the Senate floor. editorial writers, columnists, political parties, Republicans, Democrats. That's sort of kind of our mantra: regulation, deregulation, and sometimes the rhetoric and the highly charged, rhetoric, for lack of a better phrase or definition, sort of gets murky. What can you say could help revive, if you will, our economy? Now, you're making a correlation, if I'm hearing you correctly. If we have less delay and less regulation, is there specificity to what you mean by less regulation? Because some ways I can say, okay, we can have an open mind to it. What are we talking about specifically? We saw what happened with the energy crisis and the deregulation of energy crisis, and how many Californians, taxpayers, got fleeced, and at the end of the day got fleeced again because they had to pay back, by the speculators who manipulated the market. So then that becomes polarized, and then someone says, well, no more regulation because of what happened there.
Sure.
What concrete things can you say would be helpful to
Okay.
Democrats, Republicans?
Okay, yeah. Understand first that I don't run for office, and that any recommendation I give you is straight out economics, has nothing to do with the politics of it, okay? California has the most carbon efficient economy on earth. We produce fewer tons of carbon per unit of economic activity of any place on earth. What that means is that it's very expensive to reduce carbon outputs in California because we're already so efficient. Each incremental decrease in carbon emissions costs more. Now, by contrast, China is incredibly inefficient when it comes to carbon. And there are all sorts of low-hanging fruit over there. My own personal opinion would be, I would stop AB 32, figure out how much it costs us, tax us half of it, and hire California companies to clean up Chinese plants. And we would have a bigger impact in terms of decreasing the global emission of carbon than we have by the idea that act locally, think globally, because carbon's not a local pollutant. It just goes in the atmosphere and spreads all out no matter where it came from. By far, the cheapest and the most impact we can have for dollar investment is in other countries, developing companies. China is a leading example with tons of very inefficient coal plants, things like that. So, is that politically possible? I don't believe so. But when I first started talking about the United States needs to have more immigration, I got nasty emails. And now it's becoming accepted. So I tell the truth, and I hope that eventually it becomes accepted. But that's one example.
Let me add one thing. You would advocate, you'd advocate for a carbon tax?
No. I would just tax Californians, half of whatever AB 32 is costing, repeal AB 32, and send California companies to China to fix China. And we would get a lot more bang for our buck than we are by investing in California, where we are already so carbon efficient.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.